Imagine you're standing in the lobby of the most expensive hotel you've ever seen. Marble floors stretch for miles. Gold leaf covers everything that doesn't move. Outside, the temperature is 115 degrees Fahrenheit, but inside you're shivering because the air conditioning is set to Arctic. A Lamborghini pulls up every 30 seconds. You check your phone and realize that the GDP per capita of this place is higher than Switzerland's, higher than Norway's, higher than basically anywhere on Earth. This is Qatar. Population, 3 million. Size, roughly the same as the state of Connecticut. But here's the kicker. This tiny nation sitting on a peninsula in the Persian Gulf is about to conduct the most dangerous economic experiment of the 21st century. They're trying to diversify away from the very thing that made them rich. The question isn't whether they should do it. The question is whether they can do it. Because unlike your typical economic diversification story, Qatar isn't diversifying because their industry is dying. They're diversifying while simultaneously doubling down and expanding their gas production to unprecedented levels. It's like a champion boxer deciding to become a ballet dancer, but still showing up to fights and winning. The complexity is staggering. The stakes are existential. So grab your sunscreen and your skepticism. Today we're diving into the most lavish, most ambitious, and potentially most doomed economic pivot in modern history. This is the story of how to survive without the one thing that made you survive in the first place. Let's rewind the clock. The year is 1971. Qatar just gained independence from Britain. The country is basically a handful of pearl divers sitting on a really hot sandbar. Then, in the 1970s they find something. Not just any something. They find the North Field, the third largest natural gas reserve on planet Earth. Shared with Iran, this single field contains roughly 900 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. To put that in perspective, if you turned all that gas into energy, you could power every home in the United States for about 40 years. Qatar's tiny slice of desert real estate suddenly contained more wealth than entire continents. Fast forward to 2025. Qatar is now the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. They're shipping frozen gas to Japan, China, India, South Korea, and Europe. The money flooding in is biblical. The numbers are almost comical. In 2024, hydrocarbons still accounted for 35% of GDP. But here's where it gets wild. Gas and oil generate over 70% of total government revenue and roughly 85% of export earnings. Let me translate that into human terms. Imagine you have a job that pays you $100,000 a year. But $85,000 of that comes from one single client. One client. If they walk away, you don't just take a pay cut. You enter financial oblivion. You're not diversified. You're hostage. That's Qatar's reality. Except their one client isn't a person. It's a commodity with a price that swings more violently than a wrecking ball at a demolition derby. When gas prices are high, Qatar is a paradise. When they crash, the consequences could be catastrophic. But wait, surely they saw this coming, right? Surely they've been preparing? Actually, yes, they have. And that's what makes this story fascinating. Because Qatar isn't sitting around waiting for disaster. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build an entirely different economy. The problem is nobody knows if it'll work. The year is 2010. FIFA announces that the 2022 World Cup will be hosted by Qatar. People lost their minds. Qatar had never even qualified for a World Cup. The country had no stadiums, no hotels, no infrastructure, and summer temperatures that could literally kill you. Critics called it impossible. Many called it corrupt. But Qatar looked at that criticism and said, "Hold my Arabic coffee." They proceeded to spend an estimated $220 billion. Not on the World Cup itself. That was only about $6.5 billion for stadiums. No, the real spending was on everything else. A brand new metro system. An expanded international airport capable of handling 70 million passengers. 30,000 new hotel rooms. An entire city, Lusail, built from scratch. Roads, ports, museums, shopping districts. They didn't just host a tournament. They built a country. Now here's where opinions diverge wildly. Some people look at this and see visionary nation building. Others see the most expensive vanity project in human history. The actual short-term revenue from the World Cup? Maybe $4 to $6 billion. Against a $220 billion investment. That's a loss that would make even the worst crypto investor blush. But Qatar wasn't playing the short game. Their bet was simple: if we build it, they will come. Not just for the World Cup, but forever. Make Qatar a tourism destination. A business hub. A place people actually want to visit for reasons other than negotiating gas contracts. And here's the thing, it's actually kind of working. Before 2019, Qatar welcomed about 2 million tourists a year. In 2024, that number hit 5 million. By 2030, they're targeting 6 million. The tourism sector now contributes about 8% of GDP, up from basically nothing a decade ago. The goal is to reach 12% by 2030. Hotels that were built for the World Cup are still full. The Doha metro that skeptics said would become a white elephant is packed with commuters. Qatar Airways, already one of the world's leading carriers, is printing money. The infrastructure didn't disappear. It created an ecosystem. But there's a darker side to this story. Those gleaming stadiums? They were built by migrant workers under conditions that international human rights organizations have called modern slavery. The real human cost of Qatar's transformation is measured in lives, not dollars. And that shadow hangs over every success story. Here's where Qatar's strategy gets really weird. Because while they're spending hundreds of billions to build a non-gas economy, they're also investing massive amounts to produce more gas. The North Field expansion project is expected to increase Qatar's LNG production capacity from 77 million tons per year to 142 million tons per year by 2030. That's an 84% increase. The first new production trains are coming online in 2026, with more following through 2030. Wait, what? Isn't this supposed to be about diversification? Why are they expanding the very thing they're trying to become less dependent on? Welcome to the beautiful paradox at the heart of Qatar's strategy. They're not trying to eliminate gas dependency. They're trying to use gas money to build an economy that can eventually survive without it. It's like using your trust fund to start a business so you can eventually not need the trust fund. The logic is actually sound. Gas prices are currently lower than they were during the 2022 Ukrainian war spike, but demand for LNG is expected to grow significantly in the coming decades, particularly in Asia. China, India, and Southeast Asia are all hungry for cleaner-burning natural gas as they transition away from coal. Qatar is positioning itself to capture that demand. The expansion will generate enormous revenues. Those revenues will be funneled into the sovereign wealth fund and into diversification projects. Build today's economy with tomorrow's gas money. Then use tomorrow's economy to survive when the gas money eventually stops. It's elegant, it's logical, and it might be completely delusional. Qatar's ace in the hole is the Qatar Investment Authority, the QIA. This is their sovereign wealth fund, and as of 2025, it manages approximately $557 billion in assets. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the GDP of Sweden or Poland. The entire wealth of those countries, sitting in one fund controlled by one tiny nation. The QIA is Qatar's insurance policy. When the gas runs out or becomes worthless, the QIA is supposed to be generating enough returns to keep the country running. It's the ultimate diversification play. And they're not just throwing darts at a board. The QIA has invested strategically in sectors Qatar wants to develop domestically. They own chunks of everything. Harrods in London, stakes in European football clubs, significant positions in American tech companies, investments in AI startups including Elon Musk's XAI, shares in Indian retail giants, and real estate from Singapore to New York. The investment thesis is clear. Spread the risk, generate stable returns, and gain expertise in industries Qatar wants to nurture at home. If you want to build a technology sector, it helps to own stakes in successful tech companies. If you want to develop tourism, invest in global hospitality brands and learn how they operate. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to say out loud. The QIA exists because of gas money. It was funded by gas. It grows because of gas. It's the ultimate circular dependency. They're using resource wealth to build non-resource wealth to prepare for a future without resource wealth. Every layer depends on the layer beneath it. If gas revenues collapse before the transition is complete, the whole structure could wobble. And unlike Norway, which built a similar system but has a diversified Western economy underneath it, Qatar has very little non-gas economic activity that isn't, in some way, subsidized by gas money. Let's talk about tourism because this is where Qatar's strategy gets really ambitious. The country is trying to position itself as a premier global destination. Museums, cultural sites, luxury shopping, world-class dining, massive sporting events. They're building it all. The Museum of Islamic Art, designed by IMP, is genuinely world-class. The National Museum of Qatar is architecturally stunning. Souk Waqif has been beautifully restored to offer an authentic cultural experience. Qatar Airways provides seamless connectivity to virtually anywhere on Earth. But here's the problem. Qatar isn't Venice. It's not Paris. It's not even Dubai. The competition in this space is brutal. The UAE has been building tourism infrastructure for decades and has a more liberal social environment that appeals to Western tourists. Saudi Arabia is now entering the game with literally unlimited money and projects that make Qatar's developments look modest. Oman offers authentic culture without the sterility of planned developments. Qatar's pitch is basically, we're like Dubai but slightly less fun and you can't drink as much. That's a tough sell. Tourism is also a notoriously fickle industry. It's sensitive to economic downturns, geopolitical tensions, and random black swan events. COVID-19 demonstrated that perfectly. The entire global tourism industry collapsed overnight. Qatar's goal of reaching 6 million annual visitors assumes continuous stability and growth. One regional conflict, one global recession, one pandemic, and those carefully constructed projections evaporate. Moreover, tourism creates relatively low-wage jobs. The Qatari citizen employment rate in tourism is minimal. The sector is staffed almost entirely by foreign workers who send remittances home. So while tourism adds to GDP, it doesn't necessarily create prosperity for Qatari nationals, which is supposed to be the whole point of diversification. Here's a dirty little secret about Qatar's diversification strategy. The local population doesn't want to work in the new economy they're building. Qatar has about 3 million people. Only about 300,000 are Qatari citizens. The rest are foreign workers. This creates a bizarre dynamic. The government is building all these new sectors: tourism, logistics, finance, technology, but Qatari citizens overwhelmingly prefer government jobs in the energy sector or cushy public sector positions. Why would they work anywhere else? The government provides generous salaries, incredible benefits, subsidized housing, free healthcare, and free education. Private sector jobs in tourism or logistics can't compete with that. So the new diversified economy is being built and operated almost entirely by foreigners. The government knows this is a problem. In late 2024, they approved a new Qatarization law requiring companies to prioritize hiring Qatari nationals. But there's an exception: energy sector companies are exempt. Read that again. The one sector they're trying to diversify away from is the only sector where Qataris actually want to work and are exempted from mandated local hiring. This creates a fundamental tension. You can't build a sustainable, diversified economy if your citizens don't participate in it. And you can't force participation if government gas revenue allows the state to provide a comfortable lifestyle without meaningful employment. It's the resource curse in its purest form. The wealth makes you lazy. The laziness makes you dependent. The dependency makes diversification nearly impossible. Qatar wants to be a financial center. They've created the Qatar Financial Center, offering tax incentives and a business-friendly regulatory environment. They're investing in fintech. They're trying to attract international banks and asset managers. There's just one problem: the region already has a financial hub. It's called Dubai. And it's better at this than Qatar will ever be. Dubai has decades of experience, a massive expatriate professional class, more liberal social policies, better nightlife and entertainment, and a well-established reputation. Abu Dhabi has more money and is building its own financial services sector. Saudi Arabia is now entering the game with Riyadh. Qatar's pitch is basically, we're stable, we're rich, and we're not going anywhere. That's not nothing. But it's also not enough to convince global financial institutions to set up significant operations when alternatives exist next door. The Qatar Financial Center has attracted some participants, but it's not transforming Qatar into Singapore or Hong Kong. It's more like a nice-to-have for institutions that were already doing business in the region. Incremental, not transformational. Financial services require specialization, expertise, and scale. Qatar is trying to build all three from scratch while competing against established players. History suggests this rarely works. Here's the existential threat nobody wants to talk about. What happens when the world decides natural gas is the enemy? Qatar positions natural gas as a transition fuel, cleaner than coal, better than oil, a bridge to a renewable future. And they're not wrong. Gas produces about half the carbon emissions of coal for the same energy output. But the world is moving fast. Renewable energy costs are plummeting. Battery technology is improving. Countries are setting aggressive decarbonization targets. The EU wants to be carbon neutral by 2050. So does China by 2060. If those commitments are real, demand for natural gas will eventually peak and then decline. Qatar's entire expansion plan assumes demand will remain strong through 2050 and beyond. But what if it doesn't? What if solar becomes so cheap that gas can't compete? What if batteries get so good that baseload gas power becomes unnecessary? Qatar is doubling their production capacity at the exact moment the world might be deciding to phase out fossil fuels. If the timing is wrong, they'll be left with massive infrastructure producing a product nobody wants. It would be like investing in typewriter manufacturing in 1995. The counter-argument is that Asia will continue demanding gas for decades, and they're probably right. But the margin for error is shrinking. Every year the renewable revolution accelerates is a year closer to Qatar's gas becoming stranded assets. Their response? They're investing heavily in carbon capture and storage technology, trying to position Qatari gas as clean gas. They're setting targets for 25% emissions reductions by 2030. They're joining international climate initiatives. But the physics don't care about your marketing. Burning gas releases carbon. Carbon capture is expensive and unproven at scale. If the world gets serious about climate change, no amount of greenwashing will save the industry. Qatar's location is both its greatest asset and its biggest vulnerability. Situated in the Persian Gulf, sandwiched between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Qatar is perpetually one regional crisis away from catastrophe. From 2017 to 2021, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt imposed a total blockade on Qatar. Airlines couldn't fly through their airspace. Ships couldn't dock in their ports. The land border with Saudi Arabia was closed. Qatar was literally cut off. What? Complex regional politics involving Qatar's relationship with Iran, its support for certain political movements, and its ownership of Al Jazeera, which the other Gulf states viewed as problematic. The blockade ended with the Al-Ula Declaration in 2021, but the underlying tensions haven't disappeared. They've just gone dormant. If relations sour again, Qatar's entire diversification strategy could collapse overnight. Tourism dies if you can't fly tourists in. Logistics becomes impossible if you can't move goods. Financial services evacuate if stability is questioned. Qatar also exports virtually all its gas through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically vulnerable choke points on Earth. If Iran decides to close the strait, or if conflict breaks out, Qatar's entire economy stops. Immediately. They're trying to build alternative routes, including a pipeline through Iraq and Turkey, but these are years away and face massive political and logistical challenges. Diversification doesn't help if your geography makes you hostage to larger powers. Qatar is trying to play nice with everyone, maintaining ties with both the US and Iran, balancing relationships across the region, but that balancing act gets harder every year. Okay, let's be real. After all this analysis, what's the actual truth? Qatar isn't going to fail. They're too rich, too strategic, and too well managed to collapse. But they're probably not going to fully succeed either. Here's what success actually looks like for Qatar by 2030. Tourism grows to 6 million visitors. It's a nice accomplishment, but remains a small part of the economy. Most visitors are still business travelers and regional tourists from other Gulf states. The Qatar Investment Authority continues growing. They'll probably hit $700 to $800 billion in assets. That's impressive, but the fund returns maybe 5 to 7% annually. That generates $35 to $56 billion per year, still less than gas revenues in a good year. Financial services expand modestly. The Qatar Financial Center attracts more participants, but Qatar never becomes a true financial hub. It's a secondary player in a region with multiple centers. Gas production doubles. The North Field expansion succeeds. Qatar locks in long-term contracts with Asian buyers. Revenue remains strong through 2040, possibly longer. Non-oil GDP grows to 70% of total GDP. This sounds impressive until you realize it's mostly construction, real estate, and government services, all still funded indirectly by oil and gas revenue. Qatari citizens remain largely unemployed in the private sector. The new economy is operated by foreigners. Locals continue dominating government and energy sector jobs. In other words, Qatar achieves diversification on paper without achieving true economic independence. The numbers look better. The economy appears more balanced. But pull at any thread and you find gas money. So can Qatar survive without gas? Technically, maybe. The sovereign wealth fund could sustain the country at a reduced standard of living. Tourism and financial services could keep some money flowing. International investments could generate returns. But here's the truth, Qatar doesn't want to survive without gas. They want to survive beyond gas. And those are two very different things. The whole diversification strategy is predicated on gas remaining valuable long enough to complete the transition. If gas demand collapses in 2035, they're probably fine. If it collapses in 2028, they're in serious trouble. Qatar is running a race against time, climate change, and global economic trends. They're doing everything right according to the economic textbooks. But sometimes doing everything right isn't enough when the fundamentals are working against you. The country is trapped in a golden cage of their own prosperity. The gas made them rich. The richness made change unnecessary. The lack of change made them dependent. The dependency made diversification urgent. But the urgency came late, and now they're trying to build a new economy while the old one might be peaking. It's the ultimate high-wire act. And unlike the trapeze artists in Cirque du Soleil, which Qatar considered buying at one point, by the way, there's no safety net. If you learned something from this deep dive into Qatar's impossible balancing act, hit that like button. If you think I'm wrong and Qatar is going to pull off the greatest economic transformation in modern history, tell me why in the comments. I actually want to know. And if you want to see another video about resource-dependent economies making questionable decisions, check out our analysis of Saudi Arabia's NEOM project. Because nothing says sustainable diversification like building a 170-kilometer linear city in the desert. Thanks for watching. Keep your skepticism healthy and your gas contracts diversified. I'll see you in the next one.